There are some arguments for and against referencing. The first argument for referencing is that the biggest advantage is perspective. After a few hours, your ears adjust to whatever you've been listening to. For example, you could be writing a song with another artist or just by yourself in the studio and think you're doing great. But if you don't have that reality check, by listening to another song, you could end up slowly drifting towards a different direction. Another argument to be said in favor of referencing is that a reference gives you a reality check. If your vocal levels sound really drowned out compared to the music, you realize that something has been wrong all along, either in the production process where all the instruments go on top of the vocal, or it could just be a mixing choice. Another argument in favor of referencing is that it also helps you to work faster. Instead of endlessly tweaking, you can answer specific questions like how bright is bright for this genre, or how much sub is actually there compared to what I think I'm hearing. If you're working with an artist or a client, references can be a very efficient way of getting aligned on taste as well. That is absolutely true, especially when you work with new artists. I used to work with new artists all the time, and at some point I realized that unless I have really clear reference outright to where we're headed, this could be like the blind leading the blind, because no matter how wide your musical taste is, at the end of the day, if you don't know what to tune your ear into, even if you think you're doing something great, the artist might think differently. But when you have that reference point, you can pretty much rest assured that you're both on the same boat. Obviously, there are arguments against referencing. The obvious one would be that it can interfere with your own judgment, especially early on. If you reference too soon, you can end up writing towards someone else's song rather than following the idea that you've actually got. There are a ton of examples from music history. The one I can really think about from fairly recent years is Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams. They wrote a song called Blurred Lines, which sounded exactly like a Marvin Gaye song, and after a long legal battle they lost the lawsuit. And if I'm being honest, when you're listening to the two songs, they do sound very similar. Since I've been in that situation so many times, when you're getting in a room with some writers and you're saying, hey, why don't we write something like that? And you're all kind of tunnel visioning towards a certain kind of sound and idea. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for the people who created Blurred Lines. It's a really strong, hooky song. However, I have to say it does sound very similar to Marvin Gaye's work. And I think it was exactly that point. They were probably referencing too hard and too soon. Another argument against referencing is that it can push you towards making the wrong decisions if the reference simply isn't comparable. You could choose a song where the arrangement is a bit more sparse as opposed to other songs that are a bit more busy, and vice versa. And that could be really confusing because you realize how differently each element pops out. For example, in this song that's really sparse, every element sounds really defined and clear, but sometimes you would aim for a wall of sound or something that doesn't sound as clear as defined. So that's a really tricky point. Another problematic point that could arise is different vocal type. Different voices simply sit differently on different productions, and that changes the whole focal point of the song. If you have a really raspy singer on top of your song comparing themselves to a really clear singer, it could just be really difficult to compare the two. Another problem I do encounter quite a lot is comparing songs from different production era. Sometimes I get songs from the 80s or the 90s where the drums are kind of drenched out and things don't sound as defined. And I normally tell people that as much as I absolutely love these songs, I don't think we should compare our work to them because it's a completely different era and our ears are not tuned completely differently and they expect different level of accuracy. Another point that could be said about referencing is that you can hover around your goals without actually finishing them because you could always seek for another reference instead of just locking in and realizing that your vision is there and you just have to commit to it. Committing in general can be a problem in modern day production, and that could add another layer.